And we believe that the church is an asset in communities, so that if you live around us, your property value is going to go up because we are responsible for helping everybody around us increase.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back to season 3 of the Intentional Churches podcast. My name is Erin Johnston, and I'm here with my good friend Doug Parks from Intentional Churches. Hey Doug.
Hey Erin, what's going on?
Good to be with you. And we're also here with our good friend Bishop McCrae. We actually met Bishop McRae at the Intentional Churches conference. And so if you're listening to this episode of the podcast and you have not listened to our live recording from the Intentional Churches conference, you should go back and listen to that podcast episode. But we really wanted to just kind of double click on some of our conversation that we had, particularly with Bishop McCrae. And so, Bishop, before we go any further, would you just take a minute to just introduce yourself, who you are, what you're up to these days, just so our listeners know who you are?
Sure thing, Erin. Thank you. I'm Bishop Derrick McRae, Orlando, Florida, the beautiful city of Orlando, Florida, where it's kind of cloudy, but it's a beautiful city. I pastor the Experience Christian Center Church, started it 15 years ago, me and my lovely wife, and I've been having a great time, very informed in the community and do a lot in the community, president of the African American Council of Christian Clergy as well for Central Florida. So just really happy to be here. Glad to see you again, Doug. And of course, Erin, you're the main squeeze. Great job, Erin. So, run the program.
My goodness.
Do your thing.
Yeah. Well, it's so good to be with you. In this season of the podcast, we're really addressing just questions church leaders are asking. What are the tension points? What are the things that church leaders are wondering about, or the challenges they're facing? How do we begin to wrap our arms around some of that? And so today I want to ask a question that I know many church leaders struggle with. And I think it's something that you have spent a lot of time working on, that your church has spent a lot of time focusing on. And that is how do we integrate better with our community and its needs? There's two sides to that. There's personal integration, because as church leaders, we should absolutely be personally integrated in our communities, But then there's the organizational integration. How do we take our organization and integrate well with the community? Because I think every church wants to meet a need. I don't think there's any church out there that just is hoping to not meet a need, right? That's why churches exist. But sometimes I think we're trying to meet needs that people aren't asking us to meet, or maybe the needs that aren't the most important needs. And so, Bishop, for you, let's just start talking about how you have thought about this, how we begin to integrate with our communities.
I think the first thing that you have to do, Erin, when you're thinking about integrating with the community, is you got to come and approach it with a very humble posture. So often we come with all the answers, and sometimes it's not necessary to come with the answers. Sometimes it's just necessary to come. And when you arrive, if you really lean in strong enough to the community, they'll teach you and tell you everything that is necessary. Something that I've learned, as I'm also an itinerant preacher, I've learned that sometimes the needs of one city is not the needs of a different city. Different places carry different needs. And just because you are great one place does not mean that you'll be great all places. So it's necessary to sit, listen in, to find out what are the needs of the community, and then take it a tier higher. What are the needs of the government? What is the government saying there? Let's remember, these are elected officials that individuals from the communities have decided to place their trust and their hope in, that they will produce their desires. I think sometimes we really complicate church. We complicate ministry work by trying to think as if we are the Messiah. There's only been one. He's already come. He's sacrificed. So we don't have to do all those things. But really becoming intentional about developing relationships so that we can meet those needs.
Yeah, that's really good. Doug, what do you want to add to that?
I just want to ask, for our listeners, would you just share a little bit of the genesis of the Experience Christian Center and how you started, how you thought about it? Because I think it does give a lot of clues into kind of your mindset around integration into the community. So give us some of that history first.
Yeah, so we started 15 years ago. I wanted what most pastors want, a building and a budget. God gave me neither one. He gave us an idea and a few people. But I always said that the church needs to matter. So it needs to be more than a worship facility. It has to be something that if we left the city, that literally the community would miss us. And so therefore we launched out and started finding out from our elected officials, what do you all want to do in this area? What do you want to see take place in this area? And we didn't have a budget, so we couldn't be fancy and just bring in all of our robust ideas. We had to really be those who were willing to pause for the cause, find out what it is that our community needed. We surveyed. We literally spent time. I adopted schools as soon as we started. And when we adopted schools, it gave us a footprint into getting into families. Once we got into families, we started discovering from different siblings what were the needs. We started discovering what was the hardships that they were dealing with. And once we got into those different places, then we started finding what could we do? And everything we couldn't do, we partnered up with government to find out what resources did you have to allow us to do. Because again, starting the church, we had no budget to help with outreach. We just had a heart to do outreach. And with that combination of the two, we started very small. It's important that you measure your capacity at the same time as well. We didn't overpromise because we don't want to become liars in the community as we're trying to help to build layers in the community. So we came in early. We sat down. We said, we can do this. And we mastered doing what we could do until the Lord sent us help to do even greater things in our community.
Well, one of the things that I've appreciated as our relationship's grown is getting to hear the different ways you think about it and have executed on how we integrate with the community. Tons of suburban churches tend to do better like in crisis, if there's a hurricane or wildfires, and they do a great job there. But I don't hear, when I'm out on the road with church leaders, I don't hear as many bringing consistent intentionality like you've brought over 15 years to the relationship with the community. I just was in Providence, Rhode Island, first time ever. And I realized there's a difference between East Providence and Providence. Those are two different cities. And so this church had done, it was one of the best examples I've ever seen of a church that had built such a bridge to the school district, that the principal, that like they couldn't imagine that church not being there. They covet their volunteers to be engaged with their kids and the resources they're providing. And this isn't a large church. It's a church of a few hundred people. But because they brought, like you're talking about, this consistent servant heart that didn't just ramp up for a serve day, which are great. I know a lot of churches that'll do a serve day once or twice a year. That consistency is what I just really respect. And I think more of our churches need to be doing that and learning from churches like Experience Christian Center about how you've built the bridge, because it's a long haul journey, right? Takes a while.
Let me say something there too, Doug, because I think a lot of times we fail at coming in and with our rescue projects, and we fail the purpose of the missions. The purpose of missions, in my understanding, is that we're supposed to develop relationships through our missions. It's through the relationships that now we can add, helping to add to the body of Christ and conversions and start to introduce our faith. I think we come in too evangelical. We come in trying to be evangelistic too early, and we don't come in. I think sometimes if we're not careful, we'll skip over the heart of the people by trying to think they just need help. I think that if we can work on the heart first, and to me, real missions, the consistency of missions in church is just dealing with the heart of the individual for humanity, not for just the help of society. And I think that's where we miss a lot. And then because the truth is, when you really get into this type of work, it may not add to your pews. It may not add new people to your church personally. They may go to a different worship place, that maybe their worship styles better are embraced. But what you do is you begin to sow a seed. And I don't think ministries approach outreach or missions from the standpoint of a seed as much as they're looking at the blossom. And I think it's that interferes with us with the pureness of our heart, of being consistent. Because when you're not looking at the blossom, when you don't see a bud, you don't get frustrated.
Yeah. I love. I'm more and more as I'm aging. I believed, like you're talking about, in microwave evangelicalism, that it is just not. What has been so helpful to me the last few years is the long view. How do I take the long view and that God is dynamic. I'm not just a one-to-one Christian out there in the world. There are a lot of Christ followers, and I might be planting or watering, but God gives increase. And so the long view for me, like you're talking about, super helpful.
I'm curious for our listeners who are church leaders, who are already being helped by what you're saying about, we show up with a posture of listening. We show up asking. How do you talk about the way that you approach outreach in your church? Like what's the language you use? How are your people hearing you talk about this? Because that directly affects how they themselves engage. Can you help us into that?
Yeah, first we had to definitely tie everybody into the vision of our church. So the vision statement of our church, we had to simplify it because when I first started, it was real deep. I mean, it was long and deep, so long and deep that I forgot what it was. But
yes,
that's so good.
So I had to simplify it. And our vision now is to experience lives through godly practices. That's our whole vision, to experience lives, to impact lives through godly experiences. That's it. To impact lives through godly experiences. So I think that what we did was we do a lot of people do a great job in outreach and trying to market outreach, but we don't do a good job in marketing in reach. So I spent a lot of times with flyers, with slogans that said nothing to the community, but said everything to the church. So our slogan is "We're bigger than a Sunday." That became so infectious within our church that when it finally hit the community, the church was saying it like it was the name of our church. We're bigger than a Sunday. So we practice and we put things in place. And I challenged my marketing team to market to the people that we have. We didn't have many yet, but we market to those few. And then we trained all those to say who we are. And who we are is we're church for the community. The Experience Christian Center is about impacting lives through godly experiences. It was driven. We even had cards that we put into our members' pockets. And if we catch you with one of those cards in your pocket, we would reward you because we were so intentional about the entire body knowing our mission. And I think that's where we failed. I don't think that we bring members in, but we don't engrave the mission in of our church. And we really was intentional with that. We made flyers for the members to see what we do, who we do, not to go to the community, because you don't market to the homeless, so you have to market to your people to show up where homeless is. And so that's kind of how we did. So we really were intentional about our interior marketing for our membership.
Yeah, that's really solid. It makes me think of like this language around having a strong value proposition for your people for why they should engage in the things that you're doing. It's like, I think so often as churches, we try to communicate even to our own what we want for them. And people that show up in our churches are like, why do I care about that? And so we have to meet people in what they care about and what matters to them. So a great a slogan like "We're bigger than a Sunday" totally reaches people who want church to impact their life beyond just an hour on Sunday. So that's really solid. I appreciate that.
And another thing that really adds to it is, as the leader, you have to get in the trenches. You can't direct from a distance. They have to see that you believe in what you say first, and then it catches fire, and then it becomes infectious, and it spreads through. It's almost like that pebble that drops in a water and that ripple effect that goes all around. But the pastor, the senior leader, has to first be the pebble.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually just going to ask you, Bishop, how you think about personally, like you, the leader of this church, how do you think about how you engage the community on a personal level and then organizational? Like, are those the same for you, or are you, do you engage differently on each? Because I think that's important for our listeners to hear. Like you just said, you're not just directing an organization to be engaged. So how do you think about your personal engagement in the community?
So for me personally, I sit on a lot of boards in the community, first of all, where I'm able to, because there's levels to change. And I think that's important piece for people to understand. There are levels to change. So when I first started, I was just sweat equity guy. That's all I was. I was rolling up my sleeves and doing everything as well. As the ministry grew, I also started getting invited to certain boards. Now, when I got to boards, I was able to help direct money but I never lost my sweat equity. So I still roll up my sleeves, even though I put on my ties. So I'm doing both the entire time. That fell out, but that's okay. And so I still roll up my sleeves, even though I'm climbing ladders. I think it's necessary. You can't expect people to put in hard labor if you don't show them that you will be what you're asking of them. And so the way that I even got into outreach was very, very divine. A major hurricane had come through our city and it had torn up so much. And we had been privileged enough to go over to one of my friends' house who lives out a little bit outside of the city. And they have a basement in Florida. Can you believe it? They have a basement in their house. And we rode the storm out. The next morning, my wife and I get up to, for one, we need to just clear our mind and get out of the house. We're riding on the streets, going back to look at the damage of our house and what may be taking place. Mind you, during this time, we're real tight on our budget because we started the church, and you know how rich you are when you start a church. And so we had started. We was driving to see, and I remember seeing people hungry, and like I saw all these individuals power out, and the Lord spoke to me and said, "You don't have the money for them, but you have the connections for them." And it was that moment that I called the senior president of Costco's for our area and said, "Hey, your store is closed. Your meat is going to go sour. What can we do?" And he said, "Well, I don't have anything to do with the meat." I said, "I have people who can crank up some grills and let's cook for our communities." We gave 30,000 pounds of meat away that day, cooked for the community, and people walked from everywhere towards our church. It was from that place that they kept believing in us. They found out that our church shows up when times are hard, and now they see that our church shows up just to show up. So we're not waiting for your next devastation. We're showing up because we're your partners, we're your neighbors of your community. And we believe that the church is an asset in communities, so that if you live around us, your property value is going to go up because we are responsible for helping everybody around us increase.
I've never heard anybody say that. That's the first time I've ever heard a church leader say that. If you live around our church, your property value will go up. I want to pull back for a minute to, I just appreciate so much what you're saying, but we use this phrase with intentional churches, we're like mobilizing and activating our 99, basically our congregation. And a lot of times when I interact with churches, their outreach program is primarily a institutional play that is doing good work, but is kind of detached from the Great Commission a little bit. It's doing the works of service for people in the community, but it's not really attaching the gospel. How have you built that bridge for your people? I heard early on that, making them own it. How recently have you been building that bridge back to mobilizing and activating your church?
Very strong. We just started a new program now called Cuts and Combos. And so this Cuts and Combos requires men's ministry to be connected to the outreach ministry, where we're bridging teenage boys with mental health counselors, with the local barbers at a major school here as well. And we all come together and we sit and talk. So the men are having stories, men's ministry are bringing their testimonies to the table. And we're talking to boys who on the streets, basically, like most of the individuals don't have family that even attends our church, but they're coming now because the hook was the haircut. But now we're getting a chance to minister and show the teenagers, listen, today you see me as this accomplished electrician or this CEO, but here's the truth. I was born right around the street from you. And we're using men from the same neighborhood that have now advanced to other neighborhoods to come back and speak directly to those boys to show that if I can make it, you can make it, because there is no difference. And we're having, of course, the conversation wrapped around what God can do with your seed of obedience. So it's happening on a regular basis. We're finding relationships are developing. We're finding that exposure is happening now, where younger men are seeing abilities to do more, bigger now. And we're finding now that even some of them are starting to trickle into the church. And so it's giving us a good chance for evangelism to take place as well. And it's all starting through cuts and combos.
I love it. Love
That's
it.
so cool. Doug, I'm curious. I have a question for you as you think about what you just said about outreach often being detached from everything else the church is doing. For our listeners, Doug, how do you think about the integration of outreach into, all the other ministries and strategies and trying like our alignment strategies? How do you think about that? If you could just talk about that for just like a minute. How do you think about bringing outreach into the fold of everything else?
Well, I was reading in Luke this morning. I've been going through the Gospels again, and I'm just amazed that our modern American church does not mirror the way Jesus discipled and taught people very well. Very rarely do you see Jesus gathering people to a location to impart knowledge. He was almost always doing some sort of outreach. They were doing projects, and he was dynamically teaching by example and modeling. And so, down to the granular of your question, Erin, I think ministries need to see when we go do work together, cuts and combos, for instance, that is actually a deeply discipling, dynamic environment where the believer is being challenged and to have to think about, pray about, lead differently in that situation. Those boys are being affected. Who knows who's listening on the side, the audience, and how, So the short answer is I just think the local church really has to see the way we're going to disciple. We need to see outreach not as a program, but it's just, hey, we model things as we're going about life and helping others and doing good in the world. And the more we can do that across ministry segments, especially the bigger the church gets, oftentimes the siloing is just overwhelmingly kids ministries totally detached from outreach.
Right.
So
what I hear you saying, Doug, is like we should be inviting our people. That outreach is just part of what it means to follow Jesus. Like we show up ready to serve and ready to engage our community everywhere we go as we're going. It's really helpful. Bishop, as we kind of round into the end of this conversation, I'm curious for our listeners, if you were going to tell someone who is like, okay, I want to start an outreach program in my church, or I want to get better at outreach in the ways that you have described it, what would be the first couple steps you would encourage someone to take if they were going to try to just increase, maybe the best way to say it is like increase the potency and effectiveness of their outreach?
It's funny because I'm listening to what Doug just said about the detachment of it. I think the first step, let's say we're already established church and we want to now reestablish or modify or enhance our outreach. I think if you're already established, you have to first teach it in Bible study in your small groups. You got to first ingrain it because we have to almost unteach before we can release. So the focus has become so much on the gathering space of church that we have to teach the model that Doug is talking about, that is taught in the Gospels of how Jesus did it. So thorough teaching, and that teaching must first happen with top tier leadership. Even if they don't have the direct influence of outreach, they have to get the DNA of outreach. So that everybody in the church is saying the same language and willing to flow the same way. I think after you do that, it's time to start surveying the community, because in this teaching, we're not just talking about he fed the multitude. We're not just talking about these things. We're talking about also the heart of Christ. So now when we have the heart of Christ, we can send out our disciples to discover the community, because they can't discover the community until they know the heart of Christ. They have to carry it, because one of the biggest obstacles that we found early in outreach was just that everybody wasn't ready or willing to receive you. And so, especially dealing with the African American community, sometimes rejection is the first thing because we're not used to having things given to us. So everything given usually has a string attached to it. And so we had to show you first that we're here for you, which meant that you have to be able to stomach rejection. And when people are in need, let's not assume that they're going to receive, because most occasions you're going to be fought. So in your teachings, in your small group sessions, you need to teach compassion, humility, humbleness, so that when they go out, they're able to now assess the issues with a posture that does not bring embarrassment to those we come to serve.
Mm-hmm.
After we
Mm-hmm.
finish that, let's come back to the round table, assess the needs, let's talk about the capacities, and let's talk about our connections. Who
Mm-hmm.
are we in partnership with that can help us pull this off? I don't believe the church should pull everything off, and I don't believe that all the church's money should be invested in it. I believe the church should really become that connector that pulls that private and that business together to help
Mm-hmm.
service the community. If the government sits on our shoulders, it does not mean that we supply the government. It means that we assist them in where to go, how to
Mm-hmm.
do. And we got to do a better job in being the leaders that God has called for us to be in our communities. Once we come up with that plan, once we come up with our communities, once we come up with our partnerships, now let's go back and let's decide on who in our camp qualifies to go out with the compassion and the and even the drive to lead this, because you can lose an
Mm-hmm.
outreach by having someone on your team who does not have the drive.
Yeah.
So let's make sure they have the drive to do it, and then after they go out and do it, bring them back and let's evaluate the execution of it. How can
Mm-hmm.
we be better? Today we've done 15 years of outreach, we've serviced over 185,000 people, and we're still asking the question, how can we be better at it?
Mm-hmm.
How can we be better at it?
So good. So good.
Wow.
I know Erin is going to try to wind us down. And maybe we need to I'm going to hijack a question here, because this is definitively a question that pastors are asking right now. And it probably could be a whole episode, and you can answer as much or as little as you want. But one of the biggest questions I hear on the road right now is, I'm scared to death of this political year. And in 2020, the church blew apart in a lot of places over politics. And so I just wanted your first blush, how are you prepping your people to be prepared to be centered in Jesus around a very perceived, maybe it won't be, but tumultuous time in front of us in the next few months?
Yeah, one of the hardest things is, and I've talked to several religious leaders who are strong in the political piece, and to be transparent, so am I now. So I just got a call from a particular presidential party asking me to serve, to be the faith director for the state, and so it's going to be very challenging, because we as a body of Christ, we need to allow God to be who He is and stop trying to politicize who He shall be. I
Mm-hmm.
think that we need to be honest with our text, and let's not lean into a prophecy that God has not shown us.
Mm-hmm.
I think we messed up in 2020 by prophesying things that did not come to pass, which
Mm-hmm.
literally brought us backwards and allowed us to look not as informed of our own God, since we said what He was going to do. And that's
Huh.
dangerous. So
Yes.
as we're gathering this time, there's a lot of different political things on the ballot that people will look at and they will take judgment on.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said that I think sometimes the Democrats can try to be, I think Republicans can try to be God sometimes. I think Democrats can act like there is no God sometimes. So it puts us all in a very, very oh my gosh, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Let's lead people to the place of look at platforms and just judge off of your own convictions. We're in a democracy for a reason. Let's
Mm-hmm.
give people the rights, whoever you feel is the best for you. I think that we don't give people permission in this great land that we say freedom for voting. We don't give freedom to vote, though.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we make it as if you vote this way, oh my gosh, if you're in a church, that means you're the devil if you voted that way. If you're in the streets, or if you're in certain communities of African American or Hispanic, if you vote certain ways, oh, you sold out your community. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that this is a very, very unfortunate process. Everyone should literally live out their own personal convictions. Doug, you may like a song, and that song may do wonders for you. That song may send me into a place of conviction. Well, I can't tell Doug not to sing the song, because
Mm-hmm.
Doug is not convicted by the song, but Derek
Mm-hmm.
is convicted by the song. Let's get everybody back to the place of living out your own
Yeah.
personal convictions and let's not over politicize what's happening in politics within our own churches. Let's keep God
Mhm.
God. Let's keep
Mhm.
Christ Christ.
Amen. Amen, man.
That's right.
Amen. Thanks for letting me ask that. Thanks for letting me ask that, man, because it is very on the top of minds of so many pastors I talk to right now. So many.
And can I ask this question too? Well, let me just pose this statement. Do we trust God or do we trust political?
Hmm.
Like, are we
Mhm.
trusting the outcome of politics?
Yeah.
Or are we trusting God? Because I believe that no matter who's in office, we're going to be good.
Mhm.
Because I don't answer just to a president, I answer to God.
Yeah.
He's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. We understand who he is. Let's submit back to no matter what comes. And this is not the first time we've ever had questions about political leadership. It's all throughout the
Mhm.
Bible. And
Yes.
we always found that God was able to bring his people through. Let's not act like those scriptures don't exist.
That's exactly right. Well
Yeah.
said. Well said. And I would agree with you. And that's what I'm trying to point pastors. Like, let's just get grounded back to the long haul journey.
Yeah.
God is at the, the basis.
And there is
Don't lose
nothing
your
new
mind
under
over
the
4 years.
sun.
Don't lose your mind over 4 years.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right. I love it.
Hey, well, Bishop McCrae, so thankful for your time today. And for our listeners, my hope is that you will go back, particularly thinking through all the things that has been said here about the ways to approach outreach, and maybe just ask a few simple reflection questions. I love that you said you guys are still reflecting on how are we doing? How could we get better? And maybe asking those questions of your own church, wherever you find yourself. Like, what does outreach mean to us? And how do we know if we're meeting the needs of our community, and have we asked our community? Maybe starting with a few simple questions and then walking your way into some of the just real foundational truths that Bishop McCrae has led us into today. I think all of us can grow in our capacity to be the hands and feet of Jesus, literally, in our cities and communities. And I dream of a day where everybody that lives around a church, their property value goes up because they
Yes.
live around a church that's really making a difference in their community. So, Bishop McCrae, thank you so much. So grateful for
Thank
you
you.
and the impact you're having in Orlando, and just leading so many so well there, so faithfully. Doug, thank you for your just the national lens that you bring to the conversation. Grateful for you as well. And listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to the Intentional Churches podcast. We'll see you soon.